Thank you very much indeed. That was very clear in terms of the lesson. So thank you, Dele. So I see Taiwo has his hand up. Taiwo Ayedu, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, GAIA, for arranging this talk by Mr. Dele Ogun. I'm also a member of the Fatherland Group, and I've learned a lot from joining that group for about 18 months now. And just to add to what he has said, I wanted to emphasize that human beings don't have problems interacting. We don't have problems with social integration, with economic integration, with intermarrying. We know that. We know that we have best friends across ethnocultural and religious lines. We do business with people that are not from our ethnic groups. So the issue is not about human interaction. The issue has to be when people are asked to choose leaders that they can't interact with, right? People then substitute other things. We substitute our religion, ethnic familiarity. So the issue is about choosing political leaders that we can't touch and meet and interact with. So I want to emphasize that Nigerians don't hate each other. Human beings don't hate each other. When we live in communities, we also learn to give and take. And in our communities, we choose the best because we have familiarity and closeness with people who are going to lead us. So I want to emphasize that this is just a human problem, and the solution is the Orange Union, meaning that we want to have devolution, where the power is closer to the people choosing their leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taiwo, for that contribution. I agree, of course. And what your comments underline is this, that in human relationships, you've got to separate social relationships, like my wife and I. My wife is Igbo and I'm Yoruba, happily married for 33 years. Economic relationship, where you're partners in a business, and power relationships. You see, love and money are easy to divide. Power is a difficult one. It's almost nuclear. And so therefore it has to be managed very, very carefully. And everybody wants their share of power. It cannot be right that we've been running with a model where only the biggest of these groups can ever be considered for the one available seats. It's like a children's game of musical chairs. When it gets down to only one chair, we go crazy. Every night there could be siblings. They're ready to almost throttle each other in order to get that one seat. But so long as there are enough seats around, one for each ethnic group within that union, the Orange Union, you'll find that the tension and the conflict abates.
Thank you very much. So I have a question which you maybe have partly answered, but okay, let me ask it anyway. So the question is, what in your opinion is the road to the Orange Union, and do you envisage this happening in our lifetime, basically?
Well, this is where our women really should take the lead, as I open in my discussion, because our women understand sacrifice. They know that one has to be patient when a seed is planted, and it takes time to nurture and incubate. It's not magic results. And you've got to be prepared to walk the journey. So when people ask me, what's the way to the Orange Union? I'm saying, this is the way to the Orange Union. You've got to understand where you're going. There's got to be a roadmap. You've got to have a destination in sight such that you can be clear as to when you get there. such that you know right now you're not where we're supposed to be. And it's through the process of enlightenment, of sharing the understanding of why what we have is broken, the house has fallen, the foundations are rotten, and there's this opportunity for us to rebuild and reconstruct it. It is very difficult for any political order to resist the surge of the people. Mm-hmm. And the mental surge is enough. You don't need to do the physical. Once people are all facing the right way, the powers that be will find it very difficult to resist the tide. I know it's been said that, well, some say they don't want restructuring, because when people talk about restructuring, they don't actually explain what it means. Restructuring actually means the Orange Union, because that's the only proper restructuring. Anything else is just moving the partition within the apple. Mm. And that would just be a power game. But the Orange Union is the one that's in tune with nature, is in tune with how we were, because each of these 371 ethnic groups were there before the British came and put us into one sack. Each had their space, each had their governance. That's part of the reason why the book is titled A Fatherless People, because we had fathers. Each of those 371 ethnic groups had their governance model, but they all had to be removed, decapitated, in order to create the space for just one single head, which is the exercise we're about now. We're looking for a Superman. Never a superwoman, by the way. We're looking for a Superman that can be all things to all people. But that results in the lowest common denominator. It's the one who stands for nothing that you're going to end up. That is not the way to run business, we know. That is not the way to run business. And if that's not the way to run business, you're going for the most popular person. How can it be the way to run the business of however many hundreds of million people we are?
Okay, thank you. Well, we could discuss that for a long time. But anyway, we have two hands up. So we have Yemi Kandi Johnson, and then we have Kayode Odewale. So Yemi, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dele, for that magnificent introduction and for the work of scholarship in your great book, which I have read myself. And so I think I should probably be a fatherless people now, or a fatherland person. Anyway, it's a pleasure. You know, I think that the contests in Nigeria over the years, certainly since independence, have been about resources, revenue, and responsibility. I mean, someone spoke about restructuring, and all this is about how to organize the political and social contract that governs your
we've lost. Or is it me?
No, we've lost him.
No, okay, right, okay, good. I was hoping it wasn't me. Okay, so we'll just, Yemi, we lost you for the last couple of minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was doing a bit of ramble before I came to my question. I was saying that historically, peoples and of different religions and tribes, etc., and cultures within a relatively close geographic space. Nigeria is large, but it's still sort of one piece of real estate. Would have a historic progression which could have been developed, notwithstanding their differences, which could have integrated them over the course of an evolutionary period. And it's interesting that now, when you talk about the construction of the nation made in a way that was designed to fail, that the problem is that Nigerians haven't had the will between themselves to make an arrangement that would deal with their fears, their anxieties over these three things: resources, revenue, and responsibility. But one thing that fascinated me, and I was reading something recently, which I'm sure you've read, and if you don't mind if I share just briefly, because I wonder why these forces to disintegration, which arise from the failure to restructure and to share power to lower levels, have not been accommodated in a different way. And so if you permit me to just briefly read from, I know Dele Ogun has obviously read it, but I've got this faded copy of Sir James Robertson's memoir. Sir James Robertson was the last Governor General of Nigeria at independence. And it's interesting the attitude that he evinces here. If I might just read. He said, then came the counting of the votes and the gradual notification of results in the 1959 election. Before all the counting has finished, rumors began to circulate that the NCNC and the Action Group were getting together and might form a coalition. There was no doubt that Dr. Azikiwe and Chief Awolowo were in close touch through various go-betweens. It seemed clear that although there were a number of seats still to be declared, the state of the parties would finally be approximately NPC 140, that's Northern People's Congress, NCNC, National Council of the Nigerian and the Cameroon, Zeke's party, 90, and Action Group, Chief Awolowo's party, 75. And that if the Action Group and NCNC formed a coalition, they would have a majority in the House of Representatives. I believe that this would be very dangerous for Nigeria's future. As from all I had learned of the Sadana and the Northerners, they might well decide to leave the Federation, for they would not readily accept a national government of the Southern parties. Even if this did not happen, there was bound to be serious political situation. This view is supported by the Sadana in his autobiography, where he wrote, and I quote, "A sudden grouping of the Eastern and Western parties, with a few members from the North opposed to our party, might take power and so endanger the North. This would, of course, be utterly disastrous. It might set back our program of development seriously. It would therefore force us to take measures to avert the need." And you recall, of course, in 1966, the question, the first group to call for secession, which was the North after the first coups, when they talked about Araba. Now, I wonder why the proper political deal to secure the safety of Nigeria was not to accommodate to manage the various groups and their various aspirations for self-determination and for management within the territory, and why it was so important that keeping a Nigeria which was dominated by the North was more important than any other consideration. Because if we understand that, perhaps we might understand that if the case is that there is something magical about Northern political power in Nigeria that we have to accommodate because there's something that is brought to the table by that resource, then maybe it might help us to understand how to manage it going forward. Thank you.
Yemi, thank you for that excellent contribution and the question. You are, of course, right. What I will add to what you've said is that in writing A Fatherless People, I read 80 books in total. Since then, I've read another 50 books. And most recently, I've been reading the biographies and the autobiographies of the various Secretary of State for the colonies, the colonial secretaries. And in one of them, I came across this relevant detail, which speaks to your question, that there are certain countries, certain colonies, that were never going to be independent, either for strategic reasons or for economic reasons. This speaks to my comment earlier about the grant of independence and the terms, as opposed to the reality of independence. There are certain countries, this is their words, never to be independent. Now, if you stand back and think about it, if you list all the colonies in the empire, and you think about where the giant of Africa, in inverted commas, comes in on the league table, you might begin to understand, even though we have not been shown the list of those countries that were never to be independent, that it's highly probable that we're on that list, especially with all the oil that was there. And so the answer to your question, why we were not left to do things ourselves, our way, why was the coalition, the alliance that Awolowo and Azikiwe were about to reach at the point of that independence election, why did Robertson do what he did to quickly deliver a fait accompli by swearing Balewa in even before all the votes were in? Because he saw an alliance in prospect that was going to reverse that 1939 April Fool's joke prank and had to block it. What it tells you is that Nigeria was too important to be let go. It might then beg the question in some minds that, well, if we were too important to let go, why did they decide to let us go and announce that we're letting us go? Well, as I explained in Fatherless, don't listen to that winds of change blowing through Africa speech that Macmillan was going on about. It had nothing to do with that. There had already been, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt had already insisted upon the dismantling of the empires as a condition of America entering the Second World War on the side of the Allies against Nazi Germany and its allies. That was the price. The whole thing is explained inside the book, but also arising from Yemi's comments is this. People often are surprised when I say, we've never had a constitution. We don't have one. And we've never had one. I said, well, hold on a moment. We've got a document called the 1999 Constitution, but the lawyers in the audience know that we lawyers can draft documents, call it whatever we like. Recently, I've sought to explain to people that the essence of a constitution, like any agreement, is consent of the signatory parties. If the consent is missing, it's not an agreement. And if it's not an agreement, it certainly ain't a constitution. And so even though the documents, the lawyers drafting that, who are unknown people for unknown principles, we don't know who put that 1999 document together, inserted the standard phrase, we the people agree to give ourselves this constitution. That is just lawyers' wordage. So I've been telling people it's better to refer to the 1999 law than the 1999 constitution. And the same applies to all the so-called constitutions prior to that, because the essential quality of consent was absence, right down to the colonial ones, because even all the colonial ones, including the independence ones, people like Robertson were there interfering with what the parties would otherwise have agreed between themselves. So we've never been allowed to do it as we wish, our way.
Thank you for that. So we have Kayode Odewale, and then we have Tega, and then we have, I don't know who it is, but it's got Medical Corps. And then we have a couple of questions in the chat from Ese, Emori, and from Falake. So I'll read those out once we get there. So Kayode, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dele, for the work you've done and the explanation you've made. My question remains that with today's reality, the North is not interested in restructuring. Everything we're seeing is that the North wants to subjugate the entire other nationalities and to rule over them roughshod. Where does all this talking and brainstorming, where does it lead us? Some time ago, maybe Dele will recollect, when I said, can we go to the British Parliament and confront them to undo what they misdid? Or can we go to the International Court of Justice to seek remedy for the injustice that's been done to all the other nationalities in Nigeria? Because the Sharia state people are not interested in all that we're talking about. What they care about is continue to rule and take over territories. Buhari went to Cairo and told the whole world that every Fulani in Africa can come to Nigeria and obtain visa on arrival. And the governor of Bauchi has said every Fulani is a Nigerian. This is the mindset. I mean, I'm not a prophet, but I can tell you that all the Northerners will vote for Atiku in February next year, and will continue with the 1999 Constitution, which is no document, like you said. What is there for us to do?
Thank you for your question.
Story?
Yeah, thank you for your question. An excellent one. You say the North is not interested in restructuring. That is fine. They have, as they are entitled to speak for themselves. It is for us to speak for ourselves. It's freedom of speech. Everybody can take their position. As I've said earlier, that is all a matter of the surge. When you get the consensus on your own side, until you get that consensus on your own side, there's no point worrying what the other side are doing. You've got problems internally. You got to get the consensus on your side, get everybody facing the right way, buying into the journey. And again, now, this is a point I want to make clear. The fault does not lie with the North. It's not their fault. I know some of their less informed people might think that they are where they are because of their genius, strategic genius, or their prowess in the Biafran struggle. They didn't win that war. It was the Brits that won it. It was the Brits' proxy war. If you want to understand a proxy war, you look at Ukraine right now, where the weapons and the tactics and the strategies are supplied to a party that would otherwise not be able to take on their opponent. So they can be forgiven for thinking that they are where they are simply through their own virtuous excellence. But what Fatherless shows is that they are where they are because the Brits put them there for British advantage. So I have no quarrel with my brothers and sisters from the North. They have an advantage and people have to use what they have. It is for us who are disadvantaged or who were disadvantaged by the British agenda to organize ourselves to rebalance it. And I also like to point to the example of apartheid South Africa. The Afrikaners equally thought that they will continue to rule that place and space with impunity. And again, their advantage came courtesy of the British arrangements as well, because it was after the British defeated them in the Boer War of 1899 to 1903 that the terms of the peace, after the unconditional surrender by the Boers, the Afrikaners, what the British conceded to them was the right to shut out black votes, which is why Mandela was the first of his people to cast a vote in 1992 after the apartheid regime was washed away by the surge of the people. So the precedents are there for us to learn from. And when people say, what is the point of talking? You got to talk. You got to get your people plugged into the conversation, because people follow you more readily if you can persuade them with reason rather than just emotion. And if the only way to persuade them with reason is to teach them, and believe you me, when they understand, they'll line up with you much faster than when you just say, oh, it'd be nice if we just came together. when people say it should be nice if Igbos and Yoruba stop accusing each other. Well, we in Fatherland knew that the only way to really build the bridge across the Niger is to do the research, bring the facts out so they can understand both sides, the true story, as against the game that was being played by knocking the two heads together.
Thank you. So we have Tega. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dele and the GAIA Group for organizing and putting together such a program. My own concern is on the literatures on the foundation of Nigeria, the integrity of the literatures that we have in the public domain. Some of these literatures are for younger generations like myself, who are anxious to know about the actual happenings that gave birth to this entity called Nigeria. We do not have access to some literature that would have put things in the right perspective for us. So I want to ask Dele, in terms of integrity of literature's content that we have there, how do one know what to rely on as the truth? Because we have conflicting information in some of these literatures. That's my major concern.
Tega, thank you for the question, and a very good one as well. You see, knowledge is so precious in this power game, because they know that when you understand, you neutralize power. And part of is to ensure that you don't know, to keep the books away from you, to push out what is popularly now known as fake news. So how do you separate the truth from the parables and the fictions? This is where groups like the Fatherland Group come into it. And now GAIA Africa are offering, by virtue of this very discussion, that opportunity to filter information. Our filters have got to be strong, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. They don't want to let go. Why should they? They're still enjoying the dividends from the empire. The empire never died. So in the Fatherland Group, we position ourselves as an information clearinghouse. When people express opinions on the platform, there's such a bank of knowledgeable people of all disciplines. Our skills base at the last counts in terms of the different sectors of life that people occupy and work in is close to 60 odd sectors. So when information comes in, it's filtered. If it's wrong, there'll be an immediate counter, an explanation. And then the websites, fatherlandgroup.org, you'll find a lot of material up there as part of the process of, to borrow GAIA's language, digitalization of knowledge. This digital workshop, we're digitalizing knowledge and information, knowing that the books may not be there, the physical books, but trusted, knowledgeable people in the area who do have access to the books are able to put the information in bite size. And so we're working very hard on that front. And by virtue of the pressure that we're now beginning to build, this is why they are now saying they want to restore history to the syllabus. It's a good thing, but you've got to beware of the teacher. It depends what they're going to teach you.
Exactly. There's a question about that, which I'll come to a little later. But so we have a hand up, and it is Jay, Medical Corps. I don't know.
It's okay. All right. It's justice. Don't worry about it. Hello, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you for the invitation. And justice with that choice. And Dele will vouch for me, I think. I can also claim to be part of the Fatherland Group. And it's a great honor to be here. Now, then I'm grateful for what you have just taught us again. I just want to pick one or two bits you mentioned. The penthouse, Madagascar agreement. The way I'm looking at it now is that, sure, you have the roof of Nigeria, which in effect, as I'm looking at, is like the Sharia core north. And they somehow merge with the middle belt. So if we're going for this Orange Union, we have definitely defined the West, we defined the East. We might even sandwich the middle belt in the middle. I mean, Midwest. But in the North, it tries to be more homogeneous. Well, not homogeneous, more monolith. We have to separate this Madagascar from the middle belt. Do you think the Orange Union is seeing the core North and the middle belt as the apple analogy, or is it seeing them as individual orange, if you like, sector? Does that the question make sense?
It does, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Justice.
So let me add more. So because I like other people obviously to ask their own questions. I don't want you may not let me back in. So that is one question, the Madagascar story and the effect it will have on the Orange Union. I also noted what you mentioned about the unions around the world. That comes into the UN, the AU, the EU, the UK, even the RU, the Russian part. All these are unions. Do you think we're going to get the same sort of setup and understanding in the Nigerian setup of various ethnicity or various nations as a union? Are you seeing them as, if you like, various compartments, not necessarily nationhood? And the reason for asking that question, because the analogy is that when you look at it from a medical viewpoint, when someone asks you to help them out with a particular illness, doctors waste a lot of time asking you, tell me about it, ask you a question, medical history. And then you just want them to treat you. Then the next week they ask you to examine you. Say, look, come on, tell me what the answer. And then they have to send off some lab tests, run some diagnostics, and come up with a diagnosis before they even start talking about treatment. So that's exactly what you're telling us. There's a need to get this information knowledge. But my question on this particular, if you like, the Orange Union is that, do you think Nigeria, when you have this understanding, history taught in school, the fact that we have Boko Haram, book is Haram, we're not allowed to read the books and understand what's going on and get confused. Do you think they get a stage where we explain it enough, even from the Fatherland Group, so that people understand where the problems are, and therefore we'll be able to proffer, some solution and cure? Or do you think we'll never have a stage where we have people the actual union being cured, if we say it? And the last thing, just to cheer everybody up, I like the 29th of May, 29th of September, 29th of July, and so on. So I want you to add 29th of July, 75, when Gawan was overthrown. He was out in Kampala, the 29th of July, when the founders been deposed. Now, the 29th of May is not, I said, you mentioned the Juku declaring Biafra. We like to keep it on the 30th of May, sir, because it's 2 o'clock in the morning. It may not have a lot of crowd at the time, but 2 o'clock in the morning is still 2 o'clock on the 30th. So I don't want to get confused on that one. But the significant question is that the Biafrans waited for Nigerians on the 29th of June in case they invaded, because Biafra was declared on 30th of May. So 29th of May was already recognized. And therefore, 29th of June, they were waiting for them in case they invaded. But don't be fooled by the 29th, because Nigeria invaded Biafra on the 6th of July, 1967. So they can change the dates. So don't be. When I first came across this sequence of dates, I realized it's a planned thing. You cannot have such, periodicity of dates without someone planning them. Thank you for all your.
Justice, thank you very much for that question. I mean, it shows the beauty of both the Fatherland Group and the Orange Union concept, because there's a member of IPOB UK. We're able to talk to each other and talk to so-called secessionists, and some even call the group terrorists. Does it sound like a terrorist? These are people who are looking for the way forward. And the beauty of this dialogue is to be able to talk to groups that are being shut out and sidelined. Now, the Penthouse and the Orange Union. In fact, your two questions actually rolled into one, Justice, because once I explain that the segments of the Orange are not going to be artificially contrived like the states that we're running with now. You see, what we did and what they have been doing when they've been creating states, they've been doing exactly what the colonizers did to us when they sat round the table at Berlin, where boundaries were drawn without regard to the realities on the ground, such that Yoruba peoples are in Benin Republic on the other side of the border, and now on this side of the border as well. And the same thing is replicated in parts of Hausa land as well. And as you can see in Bornu, where the Kanuri peoples, many of them in Cameroon, many of them in Chad, the local agents of the grand architects were doing exactly the same thing and have been persistent in doing exactly the same thing when they're drawing up states within this Apple Union, such that my particular tribe within the Yoruba group has been moved and divided between Ondo and Ogun. Artificial. The Orange beauty is that it's the creation of nature, such that these segments will be organic segments. Those segments will be the ethnic groups. It will not be the Penthouse or Sharia territories as a segment, unless they choose to ally together on that basis. It will be the ethnic groups. It will be the Hausa segments, the Kanuri segments, the Igbo segments, the Calabarese segments, etc., etc. Each, and if you look at the Orange, not every segment is exactly the same size. You often have slight inconsistencies. It's a product of intelligent design. But within each segment, each can run its affairs in accordance with their own values. If they want to have women as leaders in the Yoruba segments, then we're free to do that. If a segment wants Sharia law, then again, they're free to do that within their segment. Because what the segments do, their function, is to contain value systems and ways of life. You're almost compartmentalizing it. And if you wish to visit a particular segment that has particular practices, you'll notice You would not go to somebody else's segment and put your feet on their chair, because that's the way you want to be. So the two questions are rolled into one, Justice. The penthouse area, there are ethnic groups there. They're Kanuri, they're Hausa, they're Fulani. Each will have their segment. Each can set their own, adopt their own operating systems. But the center now, because this will be very much bottom up, the resources will be flowing bottom up, not top down. It would not be a question of running to Abuja to get spending allowance, such that it becomes like that children's game of musical chairs. Whoever captures the center is the king of the castle. The money will flow bottom up, but there will be mutual support. There will be mutual support. It's not a question of everybody thrown on the door overnight. There'll be transitions such that people can get their house in order gradually. So and the good thing is that the design work has already been done. All we now have to do is to sell the message, preach the new gospel of that new union, more constructive union, designed by us, not interfered with by anybody else.
Thank you, Dele. I'm going to, Taiwo, I see your hand, but we have a few questions in the chat. So I'm just going to, Dele, if I may, I'm going to read them two at a time for
yes,
you
please.
To answer. Okay. So SA says, a very insightful presentation. I will be aware of 29th of May, 29th of July, and 29th of September. However, is there any significant evidence that those dates are relevant in our current political economy? That's the first one. And the second one is, with history from Folake, with history not taught in our schools, although of course we introduced in Lagos now, how do we ignite and scale conversation that is focused on learning from our past to navigate a workable future? With history often rewritten, we fail to understand what our problem is, and as posited, if we don't understand the problem, it's nigh impossible solving a problem, obviously, you don't understand. So those are the first two, and once you've answered those, I will go to the rest before we come to Taiwo.
Yes. Esther's question, any relevance of the 29th in the current dispensation. We're watching it. It was significant that when we were looking at the dates on which the parties were fixing their was it their primaries, they call it? We were looking at the dates, and we noticed that one particular party, PDP, had fixed its dates for the 29th for its party convention. And that was interesting when you then look at what then happened, where PDP had earmarked and zoned the flag to the east. And all of a sudden it was ambushed and taken by Atiku. That was significant, but we always keep a watch out. And as Justice said, of course, they're clever people. Up to now, they've been behaving with impunity because we didn't really understand the significance of the 29th. So bear in mind our Democracy Day used to be, remember, 29th of May, because that's when, after the June 12th electoral crisis, the date that they fixed for the return to so-called democracy was 29th of May, 1999. That remains the swearing-in day for the presidents, even though Democracy Day has now been switched to June 12th very recently. So it still remains very relevant. And Folake, with reference with reference to history not being taught in the country, the answer to that is this: we don't wait for government. Platforms like this are educational vehicles. The technology that's available now is such that you can create a parallel universe to those who are blocking your progress and blocking the way of our children. All we need to do is use the technology, as we're doing now, as Fatherland does, to disseminate the information that our people need. Bypass them. They can't stop the information flow. And so we're not hostage to their agenda. If they want to teach rubbish history, the contrary history will be available. And we begin to develop kite marks of excellence. So the Fatherland, once you see the F logo on there, you know that it's been quality vetted and quality controlled. GAIA will be playing that kind of role as well, I anticipate, whereby once you see the seal, you know that the information can be trusted. So I hope that reassures.
Okay, thank you. Taiwo, I'm going to let you discuss what you posted in the chat, but just before then, I'll just read out Kofo's question, which says, good evening, talking about an amalgamation of ethnic groups, cultures. Indonesia has more than 1,000 ethnic groups, yet they belong to a group of the 20 largest economies, the G20. What are they doing right in being strong in diversity, and can we learn anything from them?
Yes, excellent question. Indonesia is often referred to as a parallel to Nigeria, but it's a false analogy. And so there is something we can learn. What we learn is that Indonesia is different. Indonesia is different in the sense that one of the, first of all, it's a collection of islands. And so those islands almost serve the role as segments of the orange. That's point number one. Ours is like an open plan arrangement, isn't it? Everybody can just flow anyhow. But Indonesia has that distinction, that it's a collection of islands. Secondly, one of the islands represents, I think, something like 40% of the total. That particular ethnic group represents 40. So you got that anchor culture in there. And then the extra dimension that they have is their religious homogeneity. That there they are something like 80 to 90% Islamic. Whenever you have diversity, you need an anchor culture. If you look at Ghana as well, Ghana, I forget which, it's not the Ga people, the Akan people represent 40% of the total. And the next nearest competitor is in the single digits. So there's no threat to the anchor culture. It's very similar to the setup in Britain, where the English represents 70%. That anchor culture again. Our problem, the way we've been configured, is that not only are there so many ethnic groups lumped together, 371 ethnic groups, in addition, the big 3 or 4 are near enough about the same size. So no one is going to give way in order for that one to be the anchor. This is why we've got to re-engineer and remodel it, to get away from that, the last seat in the musical chairs game. We need to wind it back to the beginning of the musical chairs game, a seat for every ethnic group.
Thank you, Dele. And so sadly, we will have to take Taiwo's as the last question before, Dele, you sort of round up and we say goodnight. But yes, sadly, we must stop. Taiwo, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. In fact, this is a very nice segue from what Barrister Dele Ogun just said. What Dele said with regards to the size of the majority or the largest ethnic group, there is a scientific measurement for that. It's called the Fractionalization Index. Okay, so I've shared on the comment a Harvard research study that actually is a combination of prior research. This has been published way back since 1993. It's out there for us to see. And I've posted that on the chat session, and I also posted the initial introductory segment of that. Now, let me read, if you don't mind, the concluding part, so that we know that this is really based on empirical evidence. It's about human behavior. It has nothing to do with us as Nigerians. It has to do with the structure we're practicing. So here's the concluding part. First, on the measurement issue, we provide a new set of fractionalization variables for a much larger sample of countries than was available before. And we put much effort into solving classification issues using consistent criteria across countries. Second, using these variables, we revisited empirical issues concerning the determinants of growth and quality of policies and institutions. We concluded that ethnic and linguistic fractionalization variables, more so than religious ones, are likely to be important determinants of economic success, both in terms of output, GDP growth, other measures of welfare, and policy quality, such as literacy rate, infant mortality, etc., and the quality of institutions measured by the extent of corruption, political freedom, etc. Let me stop. Now, Nigeria is used on page 30 of this research as an example of a country that has high fractionalization as well as corruption. And notably, what Barrister Ogun said, this research also measures religious fractionalization, and Indonesia is only 0.25. So the lower the fractionalization, the better the political outcome and economic outcome. You understand? So this research really supports what most African countries have been facing. So people should not be in any doubt about what this is all about. We are people, there's something wrong with us. We just have the wrong structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Taiwo, thank you again for that contribution. You are, of course, right, and it goes to show the level of research and understanding that we Nigerians now have as to the true nature of this problem that we've been left with, and it is not of our making. It is, and these are my closing comments, that Taiwo touched on the corruption issue. You know, for regime after regime, administration after administration, they've led us by the nose saying they want to abolish corruption. This has been a ruse that's been used even since the Uthman Dan Fodio Jihad of 1804, because when you read the terms of the declaration, it was an allegation that the Hausa peoples, their kings, had become corrupted, and it was to abolish corruption. So we've been running with this abolish corruption since even before Nigeria. But they failed to explain that of the two forms of corruption, monetary and political, the mother of all corruptions, let me correct that in the context of today, the father of all corruption is political corruption. If your political system is not honest with its subjects, with its people, that is what fosters monetary corruption, because it's access to those central funds that it's all about. And if the political avenues have been so configured to shut out excellence and to promote mediocrity and the ones who are unprincipled, once they capture the center, then they become chairman of the board when it comes to distributions of largesse to all the players in the political system. So if all you're doing is chasing the flies by trying to catch individual corrupt acts of corruption, financial corruption, and you're not addressing the root cause, which is the fraudulent political arrangement, that is a conspiracy against the potential of our people, then we'll forever be going around in circles. So I end by reminding you about the lessons to be taken from the book, A Fatherless People. First and foremost, there's nothing wrong with Nigerians. The problem is Nigeria. When I was writing the book, that was very much at the forefront of my mind. I knew that our confidence has been damaged. Why wouldn't it be? When every history book that I was picking up was talking about, cannibalism. And I was saying, cannibalism? Of all the places on God's planet Earth, Africa that's teeming with animals, blessed as our land is by nature. Is it mangoes? Is it pineapples? You don't have to stress for it. And yet we're sitting there killing each other to eat each other. And once that's embedded in people's thinking, that is part of the process by which confidence is destroyed and damaged. And the only way to restore confidence is not by sentimental appeals and propaganda, but is, they say the truth shall set you free. So you have to seek the truth, search out the facts, the true story. So there is nothing wrong with our people. We've got the same mix of the good, the bad, and the ugly. It is the structure. Nigeria is the problem, not Nigerians. The second lesson, it wasn't a mistake. As I've shared with you, it was designed. Remember the penthouse. When you go home, look at that map and reflect on that. Why is it so much taller than the neighboring countries? Remember the Madagascar deal. Thirdly, remember, all is not as it appears on the surface. You've got to look underneath. You must not be naive. It's not for them to tell us where they've buried the skeletons. They are playing for their team. It's a competitive game. And in a competitive game, they play to win and we must play to win. And that means that you've got to be vigilant. You've got to be thorough. You cannot take shortcuts. Beware of beer parlor gist in political analysis. All those ones who've drank too much stout and then starts pontificating on Nigerian politics. Beware of those ones. Look for the true explanations. And in particular, that East-West Igbo-Yoruba crisis that has held us up, that they're using yet again this time around. Every political season, they wheel it out because they know it's designed to confuse rather than to empower. But again, positively, remember that last point, the fourth point. The problem can be fixed because we now understand it better. And the thinking has already been done. The draft constitution, the alternative constitution, is available on the Fatherland website, fatherlandgroup.org. Don't leave it to the lawyers because it's drafted in plain English. It was actually drafted as far back as 2002 because we knew where this thing was going. You see, Fatherland is a succession to a group called the Movement for National Reformation that was led by my then leader, Chief Anthony Enahuru. So this is not an overnight thing. The work in progress has been going on, even whilst they were deceiving everybody. If you can't read the Constitution, you can read the explanatory notes. Make it a point of duty to at least read that. And when I close by observing that this group, GAIA Africa, which, as I understand it, is a private members club for the top 5% of entrepreneurial women in our space, leading this conversation. And you notice that yesterday, Britain produced its third female prime minister. And as I said at the beginning, it is our women who understand the importance of and the necessity of pain in the short term for gain in the long term through the process of childbirth. For us men, it's all joy. For them, they know what they're going into. They know it's going to hurt, and still they do it. That is the spirit that we need. But it's interesting that the questions and answers session, I think it's only the male voices that I heard. Just a slight observation. I encourage our women to stand up and speak up. Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion this evening. Thank you.